Good morning, everyone. I'm Carlotta Besozzi, Director of Civil Society Europe, and I would like to welcome you to this debate, which is organized in the framework of the EnTrust project, which is a project funded by the European Union through the Horizon 2020 program. And the debate is on distrust, disengagement, and challenges of democracy. And we will, during this debate, we will have also the opportunity to discuss the EnTrust guide on Enlightened Trust that we developed is one of the deliverables of the project. So, as you know, we will discuss also around a number of surveys and the results of surveys and how they on the trust of citizens towards the institutions at the different levels. So government, parliament, political parties. And we have seen that through these global surveys, we see that there is a lowering of trust that citizens have towards these institutions. And also that we have seen in terms of participation in the election as a result, an increased downturn in participation. And but we also have seen through the project that this data, and you will see it in the presentation also of the guide, has to be addressed with caution, and also that this distrust is not necessarily negative as such, and that also not that citizens have a mix of trust and distrust in the way that they address institutions and also other bodies in society, and that certainly full trust on full distrust is not optimum, but a balance of the two is important through Enlightened Trust. So today we have a debate bringing and I would like to welcome the different panelists. So we have Christian Larussen from the University of Siegen, who is also the coordinator of the project and will present the guide. But we also have together with us Julia Schulte-Kloos from the University of Marburg, who is the co-author of also a very interesting research on electoral participation, political disaffection, and the rise of populist radical right. We also have with us Gaëtan Ricard-Nioul from the European Commission, who is in charge of the European Citizens Panels, and Gilda Isernia from OBESU, which is the organizations of high school students around, who is author of also an interesting research on the attitudes, challenges, and views of youth on vote in view of the European Parliament elections which are coming. So welcome everybody, and I would like now to give the floor to Christian, who will present the guide on Enlightened Trust. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Carlotta, and I'm very delighted to be part of this roundtable and able to present the findings. This document, the guide on Enlightened Trust, basically is one of the culmination points of the project, because there we really want to synthesize the main lessons from our research in an accessible writing style, so for policymakers, stakeholders, but also for the general public. And I'm going to share my screen to go very quickly through the various parts of the document. Do you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what is this guide based on? It is certainly based on the work of the EnTrust project. So we conducted a systematic literature review and meta-analysis of existing studies, but we added also our own findings. And as I said, this basically aims to synthesize the main lessons for a political and public audience. To be very concise, I'm going to highlight some of the important points of the guide. In regards to trust and trust levels, we can synthesize basically a couple of lessons. So certainly trust is sensitive to changes and thus also reacts to upcoming events, changing context and circumstances. So the good news is if there is a downturn of trust, there might be the possibility of repairing, if you like, reacting thus to decreasing levels and challenges. The second very well-known finding is that people tend to trust institutions very differently. So there is a main lessons that basically the majoritarian institutions are trusted less than a non-majoritarian. So courts, for instance, the police, the military is highly trusted in comparison to parties and parliaments. This runs across countries. Then certainly we know also that countries have very different levels of trust. So we have very low trusting countries and very high trusting countries, as you see in the graph. And democracies, Western democracies, particularly European democracies, are in between. So they are not typically characterized by high, but rather by modest levels of trust. Now, what does the EnTrust project add to it is, well, it adds that previous empirical research has been focused too much on trust and has not been interested in measuring and mapping distrust. And what we see is that trust and distrust belong to democracies, not only because institutional, constitutional rights are based on the idea of the division of power. So there is institutionalized distrust as well as trust, and this is replicated by citizens, where you see that from our survey, you can find some groups who are what we call watchful trusters because they express to be very trustful, but also very distrustful at the same time. Then you have those who lean more towards distrust, while the others more to trust. However, all of them always mix basically elements of trust and distrust. And then you do have a high proportion of people who basically has given up any relation to the state. So they have given up expectations and thus neither trust nor distrust. And I think this is an interesting finding and a concern certainly also for policymakers and stakeholders. Now, moving to the determinants, we have listed a number of them from research showing that there are factors that link, that are correlated highly with trust. We can say the profile of a high trusting person, it is rather an older person, a woman with high education, stronger religious inclinations, and a high political interest. But the same thing we can say that also trust levels vary according to countries and institutional performance and governance quality. So we indeed can say that we have a good knowledge of what the factors that impact on trust. What we know little is what factors impact on distrust. And what we found out in our research is that indeed the determinants are not the same. We can see, for instance, that trust and distrust increases with age. So this is an interesting thing. However, there are also factors that impact more strongly on trust than on distrust. And I just listed here on the slide some of the divergent factors that have an impact on trust, which as a general lesson show that if you want to increase trust, you have to look for certain factors, but they are not immediately the same than those that you might have in mind when you want to deal with distrust level. So I think here you need a more balanced and more targeted approach to the question of trust and distrust. Now, the second important element is the question, how does trust develop? And we know we have some indications about the development of trust across time, but we have very, very little insights on the development of distrust. And as Carlotta said, distrust in itself is not bad. So the question is, how much distrust can democratic systems of government tolerate? And when does the problem become difficult? So here, much more analysis and evidence is required, because so far the insights we have only allow for very tentative indications. So what we can take as a main lesson is that certainly there are events and challenges like crisis, scandals that really certainly impact on trust levels and certainly might spur distrust. However, these events per se are not really a matter of concern, because we know, for instance, that crisis, at the beginning of crisis, trust in institutions increases because people have expectations that institutions might handle the crisis. So it's rather the handling of these events that makes a difference, and that's why we have to look at the quality of governance and institutional performances. And that's why what we deduced from our analysis is that indeed a critical threshold is reached when there are such societal challenges, but a poor institutional performance, and additionally a bad mistrust management, because expressing distrust is the most natural thing in democracies, particularly reacting to elements of societal challenges. But the way how crisis is expressed and processes seems to be the most important element in the downsizing threshold. So particularly concern thus is when there is generalized mistrust that outweighs trust, and that might lead to self-fulfilling, self-reinforcing, and spillover effects across domains. And this then leads us in the guide to identify specific scenarios that policymakers and stakeholders might have in mind when conceiving of policy measures. So we speak of a trustopia, where we say that certainly high trust might be a value in itself. However, there might be a dystopian development of high trust when it leads into blind obedience that might support autocratic rule. And this is hence high trust in itself is not something that we should be striving for. On the other hand, however, generalized distrust is also highly problematic because this basically might lead to political instability and mushrooming social divisions. A further scenario that seems to be problematic is a system where citizens have given up any expectations towards the governance system, so they don't express any trust or distrust, and might thus lead to a system where semi-private or alternative forms of governments might emerge. And I think this is something discussed in the literature in regard to failed states or regions of limited statehood. So maybe a topic that is not really so relevant for European societies, but certainly for others. So what we envision is thus a scenario that is we call equilibria, and where basically the question is of to allow for trust and mistrust expressions, to institutionalize basically arenas and procedures of expressing distrust, and thus opening spaces for critical citizenship, for critical dialogue, and communal engagement. And I leave it here, and I'm glad then to listen to your questions and your comments. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Christian. I also would like to say to our viewers that they can also put comments in the chat, and that we will be able to see them and address them. So I would like now to give the floor to Julia Schulte-Kloss. And I wanted to actually ask you if in your research, actually, you have studied the link between political disaffection and the surge of the far right. And can you illustrate to us your findings on these links? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for this brief introduction. And before I start, let me just try to situate a bit what I'm going to present now in the wider context that we've just been introduced to. So, like, one way I think to measure trust and to see how trustful citizens are towards different political institutions, political parties, evidently, as we just saw, is through survey data, right? And this, of course, has like certain advantages and certain disadvantages. And there are also limitations to it, as we, like, for some citizens wouldn't even be able to contact them anymore, right? So those who are super distrusting, they would just refrain from actually answering to a survey proposed by social scientists, right? So they're so far from the system that they are too distrusting to even participate, right? So this is something that we can't really take even into account when we look at survey data. So when we're trying to understand or make sense of the findings, right, we always have to ask ourselves also, what are the individuals that we don't even observe in the survey, right? Ideally, I mean, we rely on representative samples, but still there are some people who wouldn't even answer any questions. They're so distrustful. They just hang up the phone or close the door, or like don't participate in an online survey these days, right? So this is a challenge that we have to address. And what our research has like kind of alternatively relied on is on a more like less direct, so it's a bit more of a distant measure, but instead it's a measure of trust that we can directly observe. So it's a real world measure that we actually see something that is present, where we don't have this kind of intermediate layer of introducing a survey that introduces some bias. And what else is like different in our research is that here in our case, trust isn't a dependent variable. So we're not interested in answering the question, what explains different levels of trust? But we're rather interested in trust as an independent variable, or disaffection as we call it. So what are the effects of disaffection, right? And in our case, we were specifically interested, I mean, it came a bit through us in the previous presentation, that has certain effects on radical right parties, on those parties who are very far from actually complying with the democratic standards, or those responsible for questioning the democratic system in itself. So we looked at this question specifically, right? So under which conditions do radical right parties benefit from an increase in electoral turnout? So kind of a mobilization of potentially a group of people who are really alienated from the political system beforehand. And what are these conditions? And our hypothesis, or our central argument, was that it is precisely on the conditions of widespread distrust where the radical right is able, once mobilizing these segments of society, to gain in electoral popularity. And by looking at this data, what we also found is, and this is maybe like kind of the positive message that came out of our research, we also found that the contrary is true if this widespread like political alienation, political disaffection isn't present, right, a priori. So in political context, where we see that the electorate is still engaged, is still part of the political system in itself and isn't so alienated that they wouldn't at all participate anymore. Actually, once citizens start to increasingly participate in politics, the radical right actually stands to lose. And this is, like, I think, the positive takeaway. So maybe I'm not going to make you read the regression tables and the analysis, but maybe let's just look at kind of like what I just described. Let's just look at this through a key figure of this differential effect of political disaffection. So what we see here, we split our analysis for national elections and EP elections simply because it's a different kind of theme, but EP elections, participation in EP election is a bit of a different type, right? We know that people have a lower tendency to participate in the second order elections, as we call them in political science, to begin with. So we separated what you see here, the national elections and the EP elections, and these are actually different levels of political disaffection. So we constructed an index that measures these levels of political disaffection. And again, this isn't survey data, this is electoral data. So this is this is data that we really observe, data at a small spatial level, specifically at the level of municipalities in Germany. So they are quite small as units, and we observe kind of the level of political disaffection through looking at the share of voters who casted an invalid vote or a blank vote in previous elections, so before the AfD even existed. So this is how we constructed this index of political disaffection, where high values indicate strong levels of political disaffection. And these are actually the extent to which the radical right then tends to benefit or not. And what we really see here is that, like in conditions of a turnout surge, so increases in electoral participation, the radical right stands to win, but only if the level of political disaffection a priori is quite pronounced. So this is, I think, the main finding. I am happy to go more into the methodology of our research if there's any questions, but then I'm also looking forward to hearing from the others, so I'm not going to take too much time now at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. That was very interesting, and I think it will definitely contribute to our debate. I would like to now turn to Gaetan Ricard-Nioul from the European Commission, and actually I wanted to ask her if she can tell us a bit about the work that and the conclusion, also the impact of the work that the Commission has done as a follow-up of the Conference on the Future of Europe, where several citizens panels have been launched with randomly selected citizens, and also to see if this work through the citizens panel has indeed contributed to more participation at the different levels, or what's in general the impact that you have observed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlotta, and hello everyone. Thanks for this invitation and this very interesting study that you have shared with us. I think it's extremely interesting the way you are unpacking this notion of trust and showing that indeed distrust can also be an interesting critical thinking, and we should not necessarily look at it in a negative way. I will come back to that and try to make the link with the work that we are doing at the European Commission level. But maybe before I go into that, because you are very much aware of the activities that we have run until since the Conference on the Future of Europe, as a follow-up, in fact, to the Conference on the Future of Europe. But maybe recall for everyone listening now that I think it was indeed a game changer, the Conference on the Future of Europe, in terms of developing participatory and deliberative democracy at EU level. It allowed to test many democratic innovation that proved useful and effective, and so we are continuing in that direction. We are continuing basically trying to implement a new phase of citizen engagement, embedding it really, embedding different type of citizen engagement in the policymaking process. And we have these two flagship now initiatives. One indeed are the European Citizens Panels that you mentioned, and I will come back to them. But also now you may know that we have launched a citizen engagement platform, which is also a multilingual deliberative space online, where we open a debate with any citizen who want to contribute, that can then feed into the deliberation of the European Citizens Panel. So it is our way also to connect these participatory formats, which are extremely powerful, but at the end are open to the 150 who were lucky to be randomly selected. So we wanted to give every citizen also the possibility to bring some ideas to the table on the topic that is being discussed in the panel, but it can be also other format of citizen engagement in the future. Just to mention also that this new phase of citizen engagement has an important element also that is not so visible on the outside, but is important inside the European Commission, is that we are really trying to mainstream citizen engagement in all the activities the Commission can have, really, as I said, embedding it in the policymaking process. We now have an inter-service group on citizen engagement where we exchange best practices. We have a corporate guidance with different formats that can be implemented. And you must have seen as well that in the Defense of Democracy package that was adopted not that long ago by the College of Commissioners, there is also a recommendation to member states to try to develop more this kind of participatory and deliberative practices at home, from the local to the national level. So we are really trying to see that as with a consistent approach, both within the Commission, but also more widely in the European democracy. The European Citizens Panels, for those who are not familiar with, they are randomly selected citizen assemblies at pan-EU level. So 150 citizens come for 3 weekends of deliberations in Brussels, and 2 in Brussels, 1 online. And they are randomly selected using, randomly generated phone numbers. And we try to constitute a group which is representative of EU diversity using 5 different criteria, including level of education, socioeconomic background, and of course, age, gender, and the or geographical origin, so nationality, but also rural, urban. So we have a very good group, and their deliberation usually is extremely interesting. At the moment, we just finished one on energy efficiency, and we are also about to have the second session of another one on a very interesting topic, which is tackling hatred in society. The panels are really embedded in the policymaking process, meaning they are preparing recommendation to influence the preparation of a policy initiative that the Commission will propose to the 2 other institutions, the 2 co-legislators, the Council and the Parliament. So what lessons do we have now from all these processes? What can we draw? What lessons can we draw from these experiences? We don't have a lot of distance, as you know, because as soon as the Conference, the Future of Europe ended, we launched already 3 citizens panel in 23, and then now 2 in 24. But we do have some, and we are making surveys at the end of each of these panels with specific questions, so we can see the impact of the panels, and hopefully after the 4 of the conference and the 5 that we have just ended, we will be ending mid-May. We will have some data that can be quite interesting. Can already share a bit with you. But first of all, to connect these experiences with the research that you are doing, I think we need to look at the why we are doing this, and this will make that link a bit more obvious. One, of course, and I'll come back to it, is indeed to try to let's say reinforce our democracies and tackle the weaknesses that we all witness in our democracies, and trust, and the lack of trust is certainly one of them. And I will come back to that. But first, also, it's not only a reactive experience, in a reactive initiative. It's not only because our democracies are weaker or threatened. It's also simply because our democracies are evolving, and we need to make them fit for the future. We have citizens now who have a way to get informed that is completely transformed, and they expect more than voting in elections every 5 years. Of course, this is still extremely important. Of course, we hope a big mobilization for the European election, but we also need to think of way to engage with citizens in between elections. And I think that a lot of studies show that it has a very that there is a link between how engaged you feel. You mentioned the link with dissatisfaction and disaffection and the vote to the extreme right. I think there is a very strong link between the way people feel engaged and how they will trust or be part of a healthy democracy. But just 3 points I would like to share now on the lessons that we learned. First of all, if we want a good relationship between these kind of experiences and citizens' participation in deliberative democracy, a good relationship with trust and a good impact on trust in democracy and institutions in general, we have to be very careful and take care about the follow-up and the feedback to these processes. It's not enough to have the citizens participating. It's very important to also be transparent about what we do with their input, with their recommendations. So now with the European Citizens Panels, we are very vigilant about that. We were already during the conference, The Future of Europe, but now we are more policy focused. So in a way, it's a bit easier also to pay attention to the process of follow-up and feedback. It's less vast, the conference, The Future of Europe, was very broad. So the follow-up is a bit more difficult. It's happening, but it's a bit more difficult to monitor. Here we can monitor because it's a specific recommendation to a specific proposal. So now we consider that a European Citizens Panel is not just the 6 months of the deliberations, it's a full year process where we have a 6 months of deliberation recommendations and about 6 months of following up and then giving feedback to the citizens. Following up means also adopting a report we call the Citizens Report in the College of Commissioners, which is a document where we explain what we do with the citizens' recommendation. So very important follow-up and feedback. Second, how can we assess the impact of citizens panels? We cannot, of course, bombard them with questions at the end. This is not a research experiment. It's a policy-making experience. But we have 2 questions now that are interesting. One is, do they feel more competent in political matters? And I think on that, the result is very clear-cut so far. They do, yes. And you have to connect that with the question about whether they have taken part in the participatory process before. The vast majority of them, more than 90% in general, have not. So you can also see that random selection is very efficient to bring to the table people who are not the usual suspect of these kind of processes. And at the same time, it has a very positive and big impact on them feeling more competent in political matters and their voices being more heard. One of the other elements, and this will be my third point because I want to link that to the very interesting infographic you showed us with the 4 categories. I think this really opened for me a very interesting connection with what we do, because you have these 4 categories, and one of them is interesting because, as you say, is there are the people, it's not, they don't trust or distrust, they just distant. They don't feel it's for them, you know. And I have a feeling that this kind of processes that we have with the European Citizens Panel are good to try to reach out to these kind of people who don't think this is for them. And one of the things we do a lot when we do the recruitment, the random selection, is that we insist a lot on the fact that people are legitimate to participate. A lot of them say, no, it's not for me, I'm not an expert, and we really insist on that. So, and we see that the attitude towards the EU has changed massively as well, towards more positive attitude after the panels, simply because we have reduced this distance that there is between the citizens and the EU institutions. So I think this 4 categories that we've made, and looking at it in a way that we say, okay, can we have a different kind of strategy toward this 4 kinds of categories, I think is extremely interesting, because the drivers of change might not necessarily be the same. I believe that this kind of random selection can have a strong impact for people who are distant, because these are the people who are very hard to reach in general. I'll stop there. Thank you very much. And thank you again for this very interesting exchange and the topic you have chosen to dig into. Thank you.
Nota, your microphone.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Gaetan. That was it was very interesting. Also, addressing the issue of how to bridge the distance, but also the new measures that have been taken also to address the follow-up. I think it's quite interesting to see also how this fills some gaps that we have witnessed also in similar experiments at national level. I now wanted to give the floor to Gilda. As you know, in the next European election, there will be an increased number of countries from which also the young people would have the possibility or will vote in any case at 16 years old. So it's really important to look at the dimension of youth participation. And so I'm curious to hear about the results of your study on why vote and what are the perception, the challenges, and the views of young people on as regards the European Parliament elections. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlotta, and hi everyone. Hello, good morning. Very happy to be here. My name is Gilda Isenia, and I am Project and Policy Coordinator at OBESSU. I feel like I need maybe to clarify a little bit, contextualize what OBESSU is and why we've done this research, and hopefully I will also have time to share some of the findings. So OBESSU stands for the Organizing Bureau of European School Student Unions. We are an umbrella organization for over 30 democratic, independent, and nationwide student unions that represent students in general secondary education and vocational education and training. So as such, we represent really some amongst the youngest groups of young people, so aged 14 to 19, and particularly those who find in the context of formal schooling the first forms of associationism, participation, and engagement in democratic life. And last year, of course, you know, in the build-up to the elections, we've engaged with electoral participation, democratic participation, and as part of our Cooperation Youth Vote project last year, we conducted research on the challenges, views, and attitudes of youth towards the EP24 vote. It was also for us really an opportunity to dive slightly more systematically into our core business, which is really participation of students. And it was, if I can add also something, it was particularly interesting for us to conduct research on the topic because of our unique perspective, as we were really confronted, especially in the desk research stage, the literature review stage, with really how widespread and pervasive are some of the narratives about engagement of young people in politics, and particularly informal politics. What we've been looking at, as Carlotta, you were mentioning, is really the attitudes, the interest, and the challenges as well. We've had a literature review and desk research that was the base for us to develop a survey. And then the survey, because it was mostly qualitative, and actually, Julia, I shared some of the remarks that you made at the beginning regarding how surveys can be tricky in terms of representativeness. But and this is also why we felt the need to integrate the quantitative findings with some qualitative insight. We've had focus groups with young people, engaged young people for the last year of the project. And the results, to answer your question, Carlotta, it's really, I think, a crucial year for youth engagement, youth participation. We've seen renowned interest from institutions, also from what Gaetan was saying, in sort of involving and bringing to the forefront the agency and the interests of young people to bring their voice more embedded, more streamlined, more into the decision-making process at European level. We've reached 2,000 young Europeans with our survey. A third of them are first-time voters. We've looked at various things within our survey. We've looked at influences to voting behavior, perceptions and attitudes towards politics, and also sort of more substantially the reasons and challenges to the vote. I'm aware I don't have much time, so maybe I will just touch upon a few things. When it comes to influences, one thing that parents and sort of close family are still the main influence for many young people, and whether determining in a way whether they want to go to the polls or not. This is a bit intuitive as well. If you have a model, sort of a role model, if you have an example of someone that goes to vote, you will also be maybe more familiar also with the mechanisms of it, and you will develop a habit of it as well. Schools have a big potential to be catalyzers for youth engagement, but it looks like from the results of our survey that the impact of education at school is mixed, as citizenship education interventions can be quite context specific. There is not really a unified way of teaching, many interventions of citizenship education put a heavy focus on theory. And for example, they talk about the history and the establishment of institutions which might not exactly fit the needs of a young voter. This is something that we've seen emerge in our survey. Coming to attitudes and perceptions, young people are very, very interested in politics, 70% of our sample, and their interest corresponds to an extent to the degree to which they get informed, and they read political news, and so that they keep up to date with what's happening. And this breaking down data by age suggests that interest also increases with age. So the lowest sort of interest is recorded among 14 to 15-year-olds. However, one important thing to notice is that in countries that this interest in politics coincides with the gain of voting rights, in the sense that countries where people can vote at 16 and 17, we can see an increase in political interest for that age group of about 10 percentage points. This means that there is a direct correlation between having rights and also having the opportunity to become familiar and to become engaged with the political system. And still, again, thinking that we're talking about young people, because they are at the beginning, in a way, of their political socialization journey, they are very much susceptible to contextual influences, to local influences. And what thing that we've seen, for example, looking at what young people are interested in politically in terms of topics or issues, is that background really is a big influence. For example, students or young people with a migrant background are twice more likely to be interested in issues of migration. And this is similar, for example, for the issue of rural development, which is more interesting, is 3 times more interesting for people who come from that particular background. But specific political issues do not only tell us about the background of young voters, but also about their voting intentions in a way. And this connects quite well with the EnTrust findings. What we've seen, for example, is that survey respondents who flagged an interest in justice and corruption are also among the least likely to vote. While those who are very much engaged in international politics and global affairs are also more likely to vote. And this really sort of touches well on the topic of trust. And trust indeed is one of the main, well, the lack of trust we've seen is often quoted as a reason for abstention, together with lack of representation. And this is crucial for young people, the lack of representation especially, and the idea that there is not many young faces in politics. This is something that we hear about quite often. But interestingly enough, both lack of trust and lack of representation, they explain abstentionism. However, we've seen also a lot of young people who want to vote and will go to vote regardless of whether they feel represented and regardless of whether they trust fully the political systems. Some more interesting findings that I think are quite fitting, and then I will share just very quickly, is that opposition vote is more common than vocational vote, in a way, if we can say that. So in our sample, 8.5% of respondents vote to prevent political parties to getting into power. And that might feel low, but then it's 6.5% those who vote for someone who really represents them. The true is also sort of true, the same is also true at the sort of inversely. So even if people are very much disillusioned by the state of politics today, they are not alienated by the concept of democracy in itself. So only 17% of the abstainers in our survey believe that voting is not an effective way of achieving change and making one voice heard. And so this really sort of problematizes for me, or complexifies, if you may, the issue of trust. And it makes us wonder also, what does it mean really to trust institution, and do you really need to trust the political system to cast your ballots? Finally, leaving with this question, I've presented these findings and many more that are available on our website to very many different groups of young people in the last couple of years. And because the sample is not representative, of course, the way I personally take these findings is that they really give us an idea of young people's evaluation of the health of democracy in the EU and the EU member states at this very moment. And as it was maybe pointed out by Julia before, it does not necessarily look good for young people. However, to end up on a positive note, from what we see, based on my organization, is that there is more the tendency to teach democracy on the books tends to stay in the books. And what the young people in our constituencies have voiced as a need is that they would need democracy to become tangible for them, to be embedded in the fabric of their reality, something that they can experience through impact, consequences, responsibility. And for that, as Gaetan mentioned, we need more democratic tools. From the perspective of school students, the tools can be made more accessible by being incorporated into the school systems. And we believe that only then we will be able really to see the sort of longer terms, more active typology of engagement that is very desperately needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gilda. It's the conclusion of your study are very interesting indeed, and of course it shows that there is a perception, nonetheless, of the importance of the vote, but vote is not enough, and I think it links well with the guide and the other also the other presentation. So now I just wanted to ask maybe all of you, starting from Julia again, if you can identify from your perspective one issue that maybe needs to be further reinforced in the guide, and then we'll have a feedback from Christian on that.
So specifically regarding the presentation by Christian?
Yes, the presentation, and yes, and the guide.
Yeah. So, like, I think what is challenging in this type of comparative research, and I don't expect Christian to have a solution for this problem, is that, like, it can be very difficult to compare, like, as we saw in the figure that showed the different levels of trust across countries, that it's very difficult to measure trust comparatively, because citizens have different baseline levels. Like the Scandinavian countries, for instance, we all know are much more trustful towards their authorities, their parliaments, and so on, than other countries. So this is a challenge that I see, and like I don't expect Christian to have an answer on this question, but I'm curious to hear the thoughts, like what can be ways, how can we still address this? Do we need different measures for different countries, or can we kind of use statistical tools to standardize this?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Maybe we get the other reactions, if it's okay with you, Christian. So maybe Gilda first.
Yeah. So first of all, I am a big supporter of the EnTrust. All of the deliverables. I think it's very much needed to sort of complexify the narrative about trust, and that can support both further research, but also civil society and social movements, or even policymakers to sort of take steps in the right direction to sort of fix that trust. One thing that jumped in my eye about the EnTrust guide that I read was the attention that is given to, the influence of the national context, and is something we've also seen in our research. So sort of this spillover effect between different national realities, how they affect also the European level and vice versa. And so maybe it would be interesting, but this may be more from a research perspective, to look into what are the sort of factors, the factors within democracy, within countries that affect trust and distrust. And for example, some work has already been done in this regard, and we had plans to do it also in Obesu, so to have sort of a youth democracy index in a way. So to see really what are the main factors that play a role. Is it the electoral process? Is it the media environment? Is it the corruption perception, and so on? Yes, I think that would be it for me. But otherwise, it's already very insightful as it is, I would say.
Thank you very much, Gilda. Gaetan?
I'd say that I of course, it wouldn't surprise you that I would be very interested to see a bit more on the solutions, or the way we can address this question of trust, and maybe different solution according to the different categories also that you have identified would be interesting for me. And you wouldn't be surprised if I would every research that can be a bit more specific on the link between citizen engagement and trust. But I would say I'm very interested now in this category that you have identified also on people. I think you call them the vigilant watchers, or I don't know exactly. So those who tend to trust and distrust. So because for me, then our aim, if I understand correctly, should be to have basically what matters. It's not so much trust or distrust, but engagement. In fact, like whether you feel you are part of something. And then of course I'd be very interested to know if there are any data, because I'm convinced of it. You wouldn't be surprised, because I've seen it in real life, and I know that it has an effect on people, which is overall very positive. I know also from the survey I mentioned, but any data that would tend to prove that there is this healthy link between citizen engagement and more resilient democracies. And more resilient democracies, as you showed, unpacking the notion of trust, can be not just the rising trust, but can be more active, more critical citizens, more engaged. And this is, at the end, maybe what matters over the notion of trust and distrust. So, yeah, I think that gives you a big agenda.
Thank you very much. I think 3 great questions. So, Christian, please.
Yes, these are really fascinating, very good questions. Difficult to answer in such a short time. But Julia, you're fully correct. This is the limits of basically standardized survey-based research. Simply the question of translation. How do you translate trust into the different national languages? This already opens so many variations where you have to ask yourself, are you really measuring the same thing? The solution we found in the EnTrust project is simply qualitative analysis. And then to get the emic perspective. So what do people mean when they speak of trust in the various contexts? And here, indeed, you find that even within countries, there are differences of what perceptions people have of trust and distrust. So I think methodologically speaking, you need to have a mixed methods approach where you basically combine qualitative and quantitative research. And it works quite well also because this might lead you to innovating new instruments of measuring. So I think I'm quite optimistic that collaboration basically is the only solution to this really challenging question. And basically, Gilda, you are also addressing the same question. It is indeed very complex to identify the many factors that have an impact on trust and distrust. Basically, the literature review you have been doing and we have conducted shows that there is a myriad of factors. The most interesting, however, is indeed the mixture. So how do they interact? Because you will not find the one factor that is relevant. So that's indeed particularly important. And within countries, you do have indeed a lot of variation. You mentioned already some of them, but in spatial terms, you have the rural-urban divide. You certainly have very prominent social class. We know that basically non-privileged citizens are highly either distrustful or they simply have given up. And so they live in a different world in relation to trust and distrust than privileged citizens. So sometimes, indeed, when we speak of the nation state as a homogeneous entity, this is wrong. It is not. So this makes things indeed much more complicated. Also because citizens respond quite sensitive to the performance of institutions. So if you have a good working municipality, this may change a lot. And this is something I think very good perspective in terms of preventive or remedial measures, because best practices might be a good solution to move along. And there we are with Gaetana. This is indeed the most interesting thing. What do we do with the lots of findings? And if I may invite you to read our integrated policy paper, there we were indeed more engaged in specifying basically what the implications are. And you already mentioned core solutions. First of all, I think fundamental rights and the rule of law is very important because citizens want to have the feeling that there are specific rules that they can and rights they can rely on when they raise their voice. And if they think that there is no clear rules, there are no clear rights, then this is a serious problem for distrust. So, and I think here indeed we are in a difficult situation because fundamental rights are challenged in Europe. We speak of the shrinking social space discussion. So here indeed there is a lot to be done. A second area is certainly media, because media are very important players in mediating trust relations between governments and citizens. So we need a much more open and controlled media landscape and we certainly need more media literacy. So you see, if we go into the details, we find out that there are a lot of things that we need to consider. And that's why and during our research, we were engaged in developing very specific recommendations where we thought that urgent action is necessary. And to put it maybe as an end point, I think institutions have to deal much more with themselves. They don't need to be only concerned about how should citizens change to be more trustful. They should think about how should institutions become more trustworthy, because I think this is something that sometimes gets lost a bit in the discussion. Citizens have very specific ideas why they distrust institutions. Well, because they say they are distrustful, they are untrustworthy. So they have good reasons why they think that it is not worth trusting institutions. So I think institutions should think about, and you named some of them, the voice of people. Do the people have a voice? Do they have an impact? I think this is a question citizens are asking, and you provided fascinating insights on how you can indeed increase institutional trustworthiness when citizens have the impression that they have a voice and that they have an impact. Transparency is incredibly important. Accountability and predictability. Citizens want to have predictable institutions so that what is discussed at the end is implemented. So you see, there are very specific aspects where institutions have to reform and improve their performance. And to have a final thing, what we find out as well is that trust is reciprocal. Citizens do not trust institutions when they feel that institutions do not trust them. This could be welfare institutions that check the eligibility of citizens and don't want to grant them what their rights are. Citizens are very skeptical if they have the impression that politicians think that they are incompetent as a voter, and that's why they should not be taken seriously. This is particularly true for young people. So if they have the impression that politicians think that they are incompetent, too young, not educated, not informed well, they will distrust institutions. So I think we have to look at this reciprocal element. So both sides have to do their homework, I would like to put it bluntly. And sometimes I have the impression that the discussion about trust, the burden is too much on citizens and their deficiencies, and too little on the deficiencies of institutional performance. And here I think institutions should be more self-critical and more flexible in moving and progressing.
Thank you very much, Christian. And thanks to actually all the panelists for bringing all very complementary and very useful perspective as well in this discussion. And thanks to all of those who have been watching also the debate. So just to underline, I mean, Christian referred to the integrated policy brief. There are a number of materials also on the website on the project that complement this guide, and also some tools that will live after the project ends very soon. So in this context, just to also highlight our wiki site on civil dialogue, which we hope will continue to develop, be reinforced, and also be curious about your perspective on that. So thank you all for being with us today, and hope to continue these very important discussions. And also just a reminder, of course, it's very important to vote in the next European elections. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.